federal funds for US-made products. As a continuation to that, the Climate and Jobs Act was a key part of his agenda as well, where he launched the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, also known as the IRA, and then the CHIPS and Science Act. And if we look a little bit specifically at the IRA, we see here on the right side that there are two main parts of that. Those tax incentives for demand and supply side products to get things going. And then there were direct investments credits as well. They were more targeted for energy security and disadvantaged communities, but all in all, there's about $400 billion worth of incentives here as part of the IRA. It's worth to note that the tax incentives, while mentioned 221 billion here, is just the initial investment. The estimates are this is much bigger because these are not capped, and it's going to be tax credits for the next 20 odd years. So that is sort of the scene for the long term. As a result of the IRA, there was a green renaissance in the US on green technology. We saw that there was an expansion of about 330 clean energy projects that were launched in the US. About 100,000 jobs were supported by these initiatives. And we can see here that if we're looking at green energy specifically, there was a big uptake in solar and energy storage spread across the US. There are some geographical hot pockets here. Solar is a little bit more dispersed, while storage is more linked to cities like New York on the East Coast, Texas, which are big energy users, as well as California that has energy challenges due to its already extensive use of renewable energy. So storage was a key way going forward here. There were also investments in new technologies like hydrogen and carbon management or carbon storage. And they went from being non-existent industries to being much more expansive and a lot of investments happening in this space. Having said that, this slide is from early January of 2025, but I just wanted to set it as a contrast to the Biden administration, that the incoming Trump administration and the Republican Congress has a pretty strong sense on how to reverse the course on many of Biden's initiatives. That's what they were elected to do. And as part of the Trump administration, the key is to prioritize efforts on tariffs, reduce the corporate tax rate, and then focus on domestic energy. So on a high level, I think it's important to take away that what we can see from the Trump administration is that it is the Trump priorities and his agenda. You see the Congress's agenda, what they think is relevant, and then the impact on European companies. So tariffs, and we'll go into this a little bit more in detail later on, but on a high level, there was estimated to be anywhere between 10 and 20% on universal tariffs on all products, regardless of where they came from, with the exception of China, where there were talks of anywhere between 60 to 100% on tariffs. This is Trump's priority agenda. This has been pushed through, and it's going to continue going forward. Deregulation and making businesses easier is a key part of the Trump administration as well, where there was stated to reduce 10 existing regulatory rules for every new one that was introduced. So a big focus on that, as well as tax cuts. There was estimations of lowering the federal corporate tax rate to 21% and even lower, and that's both on Trump's and the Congress's agenda. Something that's worth considering here is that the IRA, which was part of the Biden administration, about 80% or 85% of all those projects that I showed on the previous slide ended up in Republican states. So we don't expect to see a huge repeal of much of the IRA funding. It's already been passed. It's in law already today. The funds just need to be dispersed to projects and investments. So that is going to keep going and driving this industry for the near future. Having said that, Trump did pause the disbursements of these funds for 90 days, and we're nearing the end of that. So we'll see pretty soon what either the lawsuits that are happening on this case, or if he reverses course on his own executive order going forward when it comes to the IRA and other energy investments. So it's a little bit more up in the air. But something that's a little bit more specific is the tariffs, and I'll hand over to Johan to address that.
Thank you, Mats. And I think it's important to recognize that while some of the things that is happening right now in the US marketplace is unique to this administration, there are some trends and long-term trends that need to be understood in order to understand what's happening right now. So in order to sort of set the stage, there's a couple of things here on the left-hand side that talk about those long-term trends. One is the regionalization of supply chains. I remember going back to 2004 and 2005 and seeing the first companies leave China for manufacturing because the supply chains became too fragile, they became too long, and transport became too expensive. And for the US, that means that it's most likely that it is the free trade agreement in North America, what used to be known as NAFTA, which is now called USMCA, that is the likely basis for this kind of nearshoring and creating a region. The second thing to keep in mind is that while China negotiated for 15 years to join the World Trade Organization and were admitted 2001, for the last 6 years, the US has actively been blocking the effectiveness of WTO by not putting in place judges. There's several countries that need to approve judges, and the US has not done that. And that's not a new thing. Trump started in 2019, Biden did not put in place judges, and Trump has not done it now. So there is a long-term trend of the WTO not being as effective, and instead that leaves the space open for the US to negotiate bilateral or multilateral deals, as opposed to finding a global world free trade agenda. And then the third thing that's also on a global stage is the US dollar. Now, in other countries, if the sort of costs run too high or the currency runs too high, you devalue. Done by Sweden, for example, in the late 90s as a way to sort of level set. The US can't do that because the dollar is sort of set by global trade as every other transaction. 50% of global transactions last year had dollar at one end of them. So the US really doesn't control the dollar unless you look at what's happening right now with the very strict trade policies that is effectively devaluing the dollar, but it's not in a controlled fashion. It's more of a haphazard activity. So these are three global trends that set the stage for where the US is. So Mats, if we please go to the next page. This is the realities that this administration have to deal with. There's a trade deficit, and there's been a trade deficit on goods for 20 years. Last year was $1 trillion. So there is a realistic need for the US to somehow revamp its trade relationships. The second thing to keep in mind is that the federal government, in the same way, has been running a deficit for the last 20 years. And last year was up to almost 20% of the total budget, $1.8 trillion. And that is crippling the government because it needs to continue to lend money. And that becomes a political event every 6 months or so when the debt ceiling has to be raised by Congress. And that's a tricky negotiation because everybody throws in their pet projects into that negotiation. And in the end, it's typically a very partisan discussion, and it needs somehow over time to be resolved unless the US is going to continue to run up more deficits and higher debt. And the third is that the government has been seeking to maintain manufacturing jobs. When China joined the WTO 25 years ago, there was a quick outflow of manufacturing jobs in the US. For the last 15 years, it's been pretty stable at about 12.5 million people employed in manufacturing. That said, the government has, for the last 20 years, had incentives in place to try and either retain or recapture manufacturing jobs. And that's not likely to change anytime soon. And we see this administration doing the same thing as the last 4 or 5 administrations in terms of incentives, in terms of tax breaks, and other things. So these are realities that we have to keep in mind when we try and understand why some of the things are happening in the US right now. So that said, Mats, let's go to the final page on what we see happening right now, and that is the tariffs. And it is the clear belief of the current administration that putting tariffs in place will provide the negotiation basis to help reverse some of the trends you saw on the prior page. The first item is China, and China is seen as the global adversary number one. So this is actual tariffs. There is an actual drive to isolate China. And it's very clear from the way that this administration has been put together with trade advisor Peter Navarro, with Harold Lutnick, with Marco Rubio, who are all China hawks. And Peter Navarro, more so perhaps than all of them, going back 20, 25 years with, for example, the book and the documentary, which you may have seen, Death by China. So there's a very clear view that China is the enemy and needs to be combated and isolated. That also then drives, for example, the discussion about Canada and Mexico, where currently goods that are under the free trade agreement are exempt from tariffs, but everything else is under 25% tariffs. And long term, it's not realistic to see that the US puts 20-25% tariffs on all of esse major trading partners. And the top four here, China, Canada, Mexico, and EU, are the four biggest ones. That said, the US has a trade deficit in goods with all of these four major partners or trading partners. But with, for example, Mexico, the ask is for other things. Mexico has a free trade agreement with China, meaning that Chinese goods make their way into Mexico without tariffs. They are converted into a finished good, which is then under USMCA brought into the US, completely tariff-free. So it's sort of a backdoor where there's now a negotiation and a drive to make sure that Mexico closes that back door. So that's part of the negotiation. So it's not necessarily about putting tariffs of 25% on Mexican goods. In the same way, Canada has a free trade agreement with the European Union for a lot of goods, which are then converted and put into the US market without tariffs. So the Canada and Mexico topics are more threat of tariffs than a likelihood of long-term tariffs. You may remember what you saw as the reciprocal tariffs. They were put in place first as a base tariff on April 4th, and then reciprocal tariffs by country on April 9th. A few days later, the stock market tanked and the reciprocal tariffs were paused for 90 days to open up for negotiations. And the EU and Sweden is under that pause right now. So there's a 10% base tariff, but the reciprocal tariffs are paused. Again, it's unclear exactly what the negotiation is going to look like. It's likely to take time with the EU. It's likely to be messy. And part of that is the problem, the way that the European Union is organized. For trade, that is a European Union level question. So Ursula von der Leyen is the part. However, when it comes to all other kinds of trade discussions, such as certifications or VAT, those are country specific. So there's not a single party to be negotiated with, and especially if you broaden the view from just trade and start thinking about security measures and saying that there is a very clear drive in the US right now to say that they don't want to spend the money on defense to be the world's police and take care of everybody else's conflict. So if we take that to our European situation, that means that there is an expectation that Europe takes a larger responsibility for the defense and security of Europe. But the problem is there's not a single party to negotiate with. So I expect that the European Union process is going to be messy, that it's going to take time, and there will probably be back and forth tariffs and other trade measures. Then there are some very specific industries where there is a clear wish in the US to protect domestic industry. Steel and aluminum, automotive have already been put in place. For steel, that had been in place since the prior Trump administration, but a lot of exemptions were given. Those exemptions are now basically all gone, and at the same time, they raised tariffs from 10 to 25%. On automotive, there's a similar sense that the rest of the world is taking advantage of the US market, and US exports of vehicles is not matching what it should be according to US sentiment, at least. So there's now a 25% tariff in place on automotive. We spoke about the reciprocal already, and then pharma has been announced, and there's likely to come something similar for semicon, and maybe also for some of the rare earth materials and the processed rare earth materials. So this is the current situation. Expect this to be messy, expect it to take time. We're closely watching the initial negotiations with Korea and Japan for any signal to where this may end up, but expect that it's going to be messy probably for the rest of this year. So I think with that sort of backdrop to what trade looks like right now, I'll hand it back to you, Mats.
You are muted, Mats. We cannot hear you.
Sorry, thank you, Carolina. And that's a good backdrop into expanding into the US here. And I'm cognizant of time, but I know that we will be able to capture increase some speed here. So we should be able to get through the material and focusing on expanding into the US and how this might impact European companies. First of all, we've talked about the challenges with the tariffs. Yes, that is true, but there are still lots of US opportunities out there. And why do companies come to the US? Well, first of all, it's its size. If we I have the data for Sweden, but the US is about 50 times the size of the Swedish market. It's about 1.6 times the size of the Chinese market and 1.5 times the size of the European market. So the opportunities are there. You find your customers, you can scale and grow. Just a key thing, and I know Canada mentioned it as well, but it's the size of the US on a geographical scale as well. It's one country, but you should see it as a continent. Each state is another country in terms of GDP and size. So it really comes down to sort of finding your customers, knowing where they are, and looking at the geographical size, and then focusing your efforts based upon that. And that's a key message that I want to bring throughout the story here, is that the US might be one market, but it's 50 states, it's 50 opportunity markets, and that's how you should be looking at it. If we look at on the green and blue sectors, we've highlighted some examples here that if you're in the electromobility space, the business opportunities are most likely going to be on the two coasts, the east and west coasts. If we're looking at industrial transformation and IoT, then we're looking at the old Rust Belt, which is here in the Midwest, if you can see my mouse pointer here, and then the new industrial base being built in the Southeast. And there's a lot of new opportunities there for scaling those manufacturing sites. Renewable energy is in the energy intensive spaces here on the west and central and southern parts of the US, while sustainable buildings is all over, mostly in population centers. So you have all these variety drivers that are either political in mind, they're socioeconomic, or they are even climate wise. So you need to keep that in mind as you look to scale in the US. To make things even more complicated, if we're looking at business to consumer sales and not business to business, each state also has its own sales tax laws, or VAT. The percentages are different when you need to invoice or include sales tax in your invoices to your customers on the private side. When they come into play is a key thing here as well. In some states, it's if you sold $100,000 worth of products. In some states, it's if you sold more than 200 individual orders. So it's really messy and gets messy really quickly. So you do need to have this understanding that each state is different. They have their different rules, their different situations, and then you need to adjust for that. On the plus side, some states have 0% sales tax. Oregon, Montana, for example, and New Hampshire. But that might be where your customers are. So there's a lot of things to consider here.
Mats,
yes.
Let me emphasize that for everybody, because it's so easy. Growing up in Europe, looking across the Atlantic and seeing what looks like one country, one flag, one president, only one currency. So it's so easy to fall into the trap to think that the US is a country the way we think about countries. It really is a continent. And the states, to some degree, have more variety than European countries. And especially when it comes to legislation, the states are much freer to pick their own certifications, their own incentives, and their own way of attracting industry than European countries have. We've given up some of that in the way that we've come together as the European Union. The US states have a lot of freedom. So think about the US as a series of states, not as a homogeneous country.
Great input there. And regulations on that note, it's very centralized in Europe. You have the CE markings and whatnot. That's definitely not the case in the US. It's much more decentralized. There are some exceptions. Consumer products, if you sell towards Consumer Product Safety Commission focuses on baby products and clothing. So you'll need to certify to a federal level, as well as food and drugs. On the other hand, if you have an electrical item or a AI item or something like that, then you need to be certified more as a practice. And you'll be looking at the nationally recognized testing laboratories, which are private entities. They're the companies like the UL and NRAL and other things as well. So that's from a certification perspective. And standards are typically much more voluntary in nature in the US as well. Having said that, you might not be able to sell to a customer if you're not certified because they don't want to take on the risk. Your insurance company might not want to cover your product if it's not been certified. So there are much more market forces in place for how to sell to the US when it comes to the certification side of things. And the legal risk is a big component here. So how do we manage that in the best way if we're looking to scale in the US? There is one way to do it, and that's incorporating the US to make business simpler. It adds trust, it de-risks, it adds legal protection, it shows market commitment, et cetera, et cetera. You can buy local policies for insurances in the US by having a US subsidiary. And those insurance packages are usually much more affordable if you buy them in the US versus, say, in Europe. And in some cases, your insurance company won't even offer you a insurance deal for the US. The incorporation process is fairly easy. You know, there's pretty much only two types of companies that you pick, but it's most likely a C Corp or an LLC. They have the same setup, but a little bit different when it comes to how they're taxed. The C Corp is taxed on the entity level in the US, while the LLC passes through the tax risk and liabilities to the European parent company, which is not the best way for some companies to operate in the US. Again, 50 states, where do you incorporate? You know, back to Johan's point, it comes back to regulations and laws. So how do you do that in a good way? And most companies choose Delaware as a state of incorporation because it's where most companies have their subsidiary. The laws in Delaware are nationally recognized. You can have a lawyer in Florida speak to a lawyer in Wyoming, and they can both agree on Delaware law if your company is in Delaware. If you had a Wyoming company yourself and you were selling to Connecticut or Florida, you know, then you have to use Wyoming law or Connecticut law, and then there's going to be laws. The lawyer is going to be fighting each other to decide which law to actually write the contract in. So Delaware sort of minimizes that risk. It makes things much easier. And then for the long run, if you're looking to attract investors, Delaware is definitely the place to be because it allows that stability that investors are looking for. So some of the key takeaways that we've touched upon here when it comes to sort of scaling in the US. One, you know, it doesn't require any special considerations, but you need to have a strategic plan around it. You can sell from your European company today to the US without any additional efforts or considerations, but you should do some things. Don't underestimate the scale of the US and focus your entry in a key region. You know, prioritize those regions based upon your product and the resources to gain the traction the fastest. Have a good operational setup and product adaptation in mind, and know that rushing in can be costly. You want to do things right the first time. So you want to validate your product market fit. You want to align pricing with the US expectations. And for your information, pricing in the US can be a 3 to 5x of what you charge in Europe, and the prices are just higher. So make sure you know that when you come into the market for the first time and don't underprice yourself. Use legal help to set things up in the right way when you sign contracts, etc. We talked about the federal challenges with tariffs. They're not going to disappear tomorrow. The uncertainty is still there. But there are local policies on the state and city level that drive those opportunities, especially in the blue and green sectors. So look at those, see what the states are doing, what are they implementing, do they have the carrot or the stick model, and go for those opportunities that appear. The legal and the tax complexities exist. As a company selling to the US, you should focus on your core business, which is generating revenue, taking those sales meetings and working with installation or whatever of the solution on site. Work with other partners to help you navigate the federal and the state differences, the sales tax, the labor laws if you're hiring people. Don't think you can do everything yourself. It's not worth it. Work with partners and work with trusted partners to get things on the road. Navigate uncertainty when it comes to the tariffs by conducting scenario planning. What if the tariffs go up to 30% tomorrow? How should we adjust? Think forward and don't be reactive. Have a plan in place. You don't need to act on it today, but it'll be good to have in 6 months from now. And then potentially build a US base early to get that presence, to drive local engagement, to have a local partner that you work with through your own hires or something along those lines. So that's a quick takeaway here. I'll open up for some questions now before we perhaps jump into the next 7 minutes here before I hand over to Mitlogik.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matt. I'm pretty sure we have a lot of questions from the companies. You can use the chat or just raise your hand. In the meanwhile, I have a question. Hopefully, it will be the question that many of the companies have, because when we organized this webinar, we didn't have the scenario of the tariffs that we have today. So the question is, what is it that you recommend to those companies that have been interested in landing in the US? Now, in this context, shall they wait before investment? How they create a strategy right now?
Yeah, I'll give a brief answer to that and then I'll hand over to Johan. If you wait, there's a risk that your competitors don't wait and then you fall behind. So if you're not in the market already, you're giving up market space and opportunities. But it comes into the scenario planning that I mentioned as a key takeaway. So you're prepared for that if that's the case that you take. Johan, perhaps a little bit more on the long-term perspective.
I think it also depends a little what industry you're in, because there are some industries that are likely to be sheltered or protected by higher barriers. And if you're in those industries, you probably want to think about being inside the USMCA rather than sitting on the outside waiting. It's also a question of what your competitors do, because I mean, look at the 10% tariffs. A lot of companies say it's terrible. We don't know how to deal with it. But remember, if your competitor has part of their supply chain coming out of China, they will be significantly disadvantaged. So relatively speaking, you now have a competitive advantage. So it really depends upon where your key strengths are and what your competitors how they're set up and what they are likely to do over the next period. What we're seeing right now is companies that are not at all in the US are very hesitant. Companies that are here or that have already made up their mind to come here are accelerating.
Great. And I think now, Johan, if we don't have more questions, we will talk about partnerships, because very relevant topic. Moving, creating a presence in the US, maybe finding partners. Johan, the floor is yours.
Yep, and Caroline, I'll jump in here as well.
Yeah.
And I know the time, so that shouldn't be a concern here. We'll wrap up in good time. But yes, so the US is not a different market than Europe. You're going to have your direct sales opportunities, whether it's directly from your home country to the US or if you go through a subsidiary. There's going to be sales reps exactly in the same way that they are in Europe. There's going to be system integrators if you have that type of product that works into a bigger system. And then there's the typical distributors of hardware and software. So that's still the same. It doesn't change. Back to the point of being local and the state by state, you might need to have a partner in one state or a region of states. So the Northeast, for example, say cover a limited or bigger geographic space. You don't want to have one distributor or one partner for all of the US. That sort of goes away from the thesis of being local and close to your customers. So regardless of who you're utilizing in your space, you want to have multiples of these types of partners as you scale. I think one of the key big differences, and I want to highlight this specifically, is distributors. Everyone wants to de-risk in the US. So if you're looking to find a partner and you're looking for a distributor, note that they might not be working on the importation side of your product and bringing it into the market like they do in Europe. You're going to have to need a third player to work with that importation process, because the distributor, in their mind, they're going to focus on business, which is selling and generating revenue. So that's what they're going to do. Any admin stuff they don't want to deal with. So you might need multiple partners along this value chain to be able to work with your distributor in the most efficient way. The type of partner you work with also depends on the level of investment that you make. So direct sales, a little bit cheaper up front. You just need to have enough knowledge in-house to be able to do that in a good way. The distributor model requires more investments because you need to co-work with your distributor in order to do marketing and do on-site visits, for example. While a sales rep, they represent you. They won't buy your product. They'll sell it if they can. Much less financial investments. So how do you find the partners? From what we've seen, there's really two approaches. There's a networking approach, and there's one that's more analytical. One that we see time and time again is the incoming requests. Hey, I've seen your company. I love your product. I want to represent it in the US. And the European company says, yes, great. Please do that. They just see the dollar signs. That might work, but it's not the most strategic approach to doing that. You get a request from someone that is actually, trying to lock in your product with their company, but they don't want to sell it because they have a competing product that has a better margin, and now you've given away, rights to a distributor. So be wary of these incoming requests. They're not all wrong, but just do your due diligence. But it's very common that we get requests and, hey, we're selling to the US now. We've been distributors reached out to us. We're going to work with them. What do you think? How should we react? Other ways through networking is exhibit at trade shows. The US is very focused on trade shows. Business is usually done face-to-face and networking. So definitely exhibit on national or regional trade shows. Walking the floor doesn't really help much because you won't run into distributors in the same way. You really need to spend that money in the booth, show your product, and get people to come to you, both customers and partners, and that's one way to do it. Alternatively, you can network with an industry association and work through them to find potential partners. It's a pay-to-play model there as well. The challenge is that not all industry associations have distributors or partners as members. They will have only the OEMs. So you might not be able to reach the players that you need to be, so you need to network with your competitors or other industry stakeholders. And last but not least is the referral process, where you can work with your European stakeholders. Who do they work, or customers, and who do they buy from in the US, for example, and can you piggyback on that referral? So that's one way of doing it. The alternative is being the analytical approach. You identify a partner in the US based upon the regional focus you want to be in. You look at industry reports, you analyze the stakeholders that are present, you review databases, subscription services to get a long list of companies. You speak to people in the industry, and then you look at all those companies that you've built a long list of, and then you filter them based upon criteria, whether it's company size or regional approach, technical skill set, the marketing support they seem to offer, or even softer things like core values and cultural fit. Again, the US is a big market. The cultural and the values that a company in New York has might not be the same ones as one in Texas. So are you comfortable with how they operate? And you can work with partners or choose partners based upon that. So it's all about sort of going from the big funnel approach, filtering away companies that aren't relevant, and then doing a targeted approach to the ones that you deem the best fit. So the US-based partner can definitely help decrease your time to market. They can increase your sales, but finding the right partner takes time. It takes investments. Some key considerations, again, the size of the market. Again, I keep nailing that in. Focus on the state level. Find your local partner. You can have several partners in Texas because it's huge, or you need one partner in all of the Northeast, Connecticut, New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine. That's still smaller than Texas, but now you can cover multiple states. Be ready from the start when you contact these partners. They are going to expect that you have Americanized as much as possible. Your communication and marketing material uses local language from day one. Square feet or feet. You use dollars instead of meters and euros. So it's the same communication, so they can quickly understand that. they don't care what's outside the US. They only want to sell in the US. So if you facilitate that and make it as easy as possible for them, they're going to be much more likely to respond back to you. I talked about the hard and soft criteria. Exclusivity is a key thing that comes up time and time again. Don't give away exclusivity for the whole US market. Everything is negotiable. They're going to start with exclusivity, focus more on the regional, focus either on the state specifically or even in the industry and the use case, and try to work with those. If you get locked in, time box those exclusivity agreements and evaluate that with regular intervals in order to work with them and get the best out of your partner. Your partners are going to place demands on you. That's just the way things are. You can make demands as well. So co-invest with them, be prepared for this early, require them to meet targets, set your own demands, and work together with your partners going forward. And last but not least, contracts are key. The legal and the risk side, I've said it time and time again, but you need to work with this from day one. When you're approaching partners, have a lawyer with you, not in the meeting perhaps, but someone that has the competency to review any legal agreements that are sent. They can write up their own legal agreements from day one. Don't translate your European agreements to English. It's easily done, but things are going to be wrong from day one. In Sweden, I just know Sweden, but they have an arbitrary unit in Stockholm, which is part of the Chamber of Commerce. Your partner in the US might sign that agreement, but if they take it to a US law court of law, they're not going to approve of arbitrating in Stockholm. They're going to see this is a US agreement for the US market, and then they're going to push it in the US. So you're going to lose that. So definitely work from day one with lawyers on the legal side of things. And the last thing I want to mention is speed. Time is of the essence when you work with partners and trying to find them. If someone finally responds to you, because it can take days, weeks, and months to get that response, when you get those responses, turn around a response within 24 to 48 hours. The US companies think time is money. If you're not responding fast enough, they don't think you're interested enough, and they're going to go somewhere else. So be quickly, act quickly. If you don't have the answer today, say, hey, I saw your email. I'm going to get back to you. I need X amount of time. And then you follow that. And that way you build trust along the way. So with that, I wrap up my part of the conversation here.
Thank you so much. We open one more time the floor for questions with the chat, or you can raise your hand. In your experience, Matt, what is the most challenging factor for European companies to find a partner and to, build trust with the US counterparts?
I think the biggest one is that there's so many potentially good partners out there. So you're going to do your homework, or you're going to go to a trade show and you're going to get 10 or 15 or even 20 companies that want to represent you. You need to do your homework on each and every one of them. You need to spend time with them. You need to get rid of not the bad eggs, but the ones that are the less good fit. You're not going to know about their financials because that information is not public in the US. So you need to sort of build up that level of trust along the way so you can get to the point of asking how big they are, how much can they invest in working with you, etc.
Great. Thank you so much to you, Matt and Johan. We now go to the next topic, and we welcome Sumesh from MidLogic Group. We are turning now to hands-on experience from a European company who has landed in the US. So please share us the challenges and opportunities that you see in the US market. Sumesh.
Yeah, thanks, Carolina. If it's okay, I could share a few slides. Let me see if I can get this. Do let me know when you see it.
Yes, now we can see it. Maybe you change your slide.
Yes, I will.
We just see the background.
Yes.
Now, perfect.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. Thanks for this the stage to actually talk about our story of how we took up the brave decision to actually step into the USA. And it's still quite an early phase, so I'll probably talk about how far we are and what were the obstacles on our way and what kind of help we got. Yes, so very shortly, who we are, what we are. Interreg is a company which started in 2013 in Lund in Sweden, and we have been focused on the embedded sector, we say. And so since then, I think we have been growing quite strong, and I think for which we actually won one of Dagens Industries Gazelle Awards in 2020, 21, and 23, during which years we actually doubled our growth. So that was quite nice. And what we work with is these areas: wireless connectivity, electronics, safety, and mobility technologies. So I think somewhere around 2020 or 2022, I think we started looking at, okay, we have a decent understanding of how the Swedish market works. Business is going good. How can we improve it? Where can we scale this to, or where can we take this to? And that's when I think when some of our customers were also having or increasing their presence in the US. I think that was the first Trump administration, and I think Ericsson in Sweden was asked to actually increase their R&D in Austin, in Texas. Then we thought also, okay, one of the safest ways of doing this is to follow the client, because we know them quite well. We work with such a customer in Sweden. So based on that, I think we started looking into, okay, US seems to be a great place. Where should we start doing this? And so the initial phase was more or less a struggle, in the sense like we just had information what we Google and find out. So not much leads, trying to do, sadly, everything on our own. And so we got some help with our auditors in Sweden, who had a branch in the USA, and they helped with the initial parts of setting up the company and starting our first project, because we had to build our customer as well. But I think it was quite hard to do things on our own, and that's when we came across Business Sweden, and also we got help from OpenTech, who told us there is an option to get support for internationalization through Region Skåne's checks. And that was quite a relief, because we were actually spending more than we thought to actually set up things the right way in the US. And so we had a couple of sessions with ALMI and OpenTech, trying to get the right kind of approach on how to write the application for such a grant, and also how to kind of take things forward. But once it was done, I think the results were quite quick, in the sense like the grant was given in a fairly short time. I think it was around 1 or 1.5 months before we got a decision. So I think the check was for 500,000 Swedish crowns, and of which half of it should be invested from the company side, which is outside. But still quite useful, in the sense like it could be used for, the funds could be used to do market research, help you find the right partners, maybe for fairs where you can actually position yourself. So I think that has been quite a great, what do you say, relief in the way we use the money, or we got the checks to actually continue our expansion. Yes. Saying that. So what happened during these few months since we got our check? So what we learned was to actually start looking at the region, as Mats pointed out. I think it's a huge country. Most states are as big as countries in Europe or elsewhere. So for us, it was slightly an easier choice to actually corner down into Texas, because for one reason, it was these three things which helped us decide it quite quickly. One was the opportunities which we got from following a partner, and that made it easy. Okay, let's start with Texas. We compared a lot with Delaware, where most of the recommended place to start businesses in the US. And we got advice that, okay, it's on par or probably close to par with Delaware, having your company in Texas. So we had that. We took a bold step to actually start that in Houston, in Texas, for the two main reasons being the opportunities there. The competition in the tech sector, as we understood, was not as much as we see in the West Coast, in say California or elsewhere, because traditionally the market was a bit more towards, in Texas at least, was more towards say space technology, medical, and energy. So I think they were a bit behind in kind of digitalization or bringing in new technology to improve their offerings. So that was the two simple reasons I think we chose to move into Texas. And the saturation factor was also was quite low when we looked at Texas, because there weren't so many big tech companies offering, or small tech companies offering solutions which we wanted to offer. Yes, again, market placement. I think that was something, kind of a harsh lesson we got, because we thought whatever we had, however we positioned ourselves in Sweden, or however we made our marketing material, be it a website or social media, it just didn't connect. In the first few meetings we had with our clients in the US, it just didn't. Yes, I think we got a lot of nods and yeah, that's good, but things were not happening. So I think, so we used the checks to actually bring in a partner, a local partner in Texas, to kind of analyze what is, how should we strategize these sales in the US? How should we improve our positioning? And they had a review of all our online material, our pitch decks, and how we actually even present ourselves in client meeting. And I think that helped quite a lot, because what we were thinking, as I mean, very European or very Swedish in some sense, was to actually be very low key in our presentations, to just say the bare minimum, assuming that everything else is taken, understood, and things like that. So I think that changed after the couple of rounds of meetings we had with our our marketing partner. So what we did was to actually have to start up our own special US website, just to actually narrow down the offerings we are going to make for the US market, or the Texas market, and change the language we use over there. So we got a lot of help in rewriting the material, improving our pitch decks, and how we present during meetings for US customers, or potential customers. So that kind of tailored messaging, I think, helped. And since then, I think we have seen follow-up calls, and also increased engagement in our discussions with customers. And the last thing I have is about collaboration. So local partners, as some of the speakers said before, is very, very important according to our experience, because it makes a whole lot of difference when there is someone else to hold the door for you to get in, than trying to just be outside and knock the door all the time. And those networking opportunities are so much better when you have someone local on the ground who have done business with the kind of customers you're looking for, and can introduce you or book you a meeting when needed. And the last thing is grants, touching that once again. I think the chances of getting those grants are, I would say, fairly easy. If you have a strong case to put across, you could get help from OpenTech and probably Business Sweden to write those applications if you want. And I would say it's a very good way to actually start your journey into the US as well. With that said, I'm open to questions, if anything anybody has regarding the short time we have been started up in the US.
Yes, thank you so much, Sumesh, for your story, super, very, very inspiring. We have one question, and you have described how important has been the grants for you, both at the beginning and at the end. Do you think that you would have entered to the US market without those grants?
As I said, I think we started off because we had a project, so it was a bit easy to begin. Because we had a paying customer up front, we just had to set up things. So yes, we would have done it, but it would have been a bit more slow and painful process to do everything all by ourselves. So the answer is yes, but would have been slower, definitely.
So very relevant to rely on the support ecosystem. So you have collaborated with Business Sweden, OpenTech, the cluster in the south of Sweden. With that, I want to thank you. I don't know, Lies, if you would like to take the last minute to give information about the next webinars. I know that the 6th of May, we have South Baltic region at 10 o'clock. So you are all welcome, but the floor is yours. Thank you so much from my side. And thank you to all the speakers.
Yeah, so just hijack here a little bit. You're more than welcome to check our LinkedIn page. I'm just gonna make this in a full screen. Check our LinkedIn page so you can check the next steps for the South Baltic region one. This is wrong. It's from 10 to 11:30, not 1:30 p.m. And then you can scan the QR code and have access to our LinkedIn page where we're going to post the opportunities, more opportunities and next activities of the project. We also welcome you to register yourself at the ICN Solutions platform, where you can have access to international opportunities that is constantly updated. We also have a project space there, where we're going to share the information, the materials from the project, tools to internationalization, best practices, etc. You can also start a dialogue with other companies that are already registered through through this platform. So it works as a Facebook group, so it's pretty useful. If you have any doubts, don't be afraid to reach out to us in case how to utilize it. And last but not least, if you're from a company from each of these South Baltic region countries, here are your contacts from each country, so you can reach out to us and about more information regarding the project. We'll be more than happy to clarify anything you have doubts on. And thank you for today. If you have been since the beginning from the Canadian webinar, thank you all for staying with us until now.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.